Let me break the bad news up front. Number one, vaccine is not the final solution. Number two, many more people are still gonna die. Number three, by employing restrictive measures across the board, we are creating more bad than good. Number four, we have to decide among many evils. And the decision at the end of the day will not be epidemiological, but political and philosophical in nature. And finally, number five, we need to act now while we still have what's left of the goodwill of the people. Now, let me break each aspect down into more detail. Claim number one, vaccine is not a final solution. The whole world has been paralyzed for almost a year now, playing the slow the virus at any cost game, waiting and hoping for a vaccine, as if that would make the problem go away. Well, it won't. For one, the deployment of the vaccine on a grand scale around the globe is still months away. In the case of less developed countries, it could be years. Secondly, we don't know if it's going to work. Even the best vaccines out there have an effectiveness ratio of 90 to 95%. Every 10th, 20th person who gets vaccinated can still catch COVID. Even if it does work, and this might be just speculation on my side, it might only work for a while as the virus mutates similarly to a flu virus. And finally, even if it works as intended, most democratic governments will not be able to force vaccination upon the whole population. Voluntary adoption might be less than 50%. 50% is the actual number from the most recent surveys in the Czech Republic. Whatever the reason, half of the people are not willing to get vaccinated. The percentage could fluctuate some due to competing PR campaigns. What's clear already though is that it will never get anywhere close to 100%. I would be very surprised if we get to 60 to 70%, which is considered the tipping point for gaining herd immunity. Just to be entirely clear, I am not for or against vaccination. I do think that the more people get vaccinated, the better for everybody else. But it's not a final solution. And therefore, we need to think and start planning how we will be living in a world where maybe 50% of the population is vaccinated and the virus is still around for years on end. Claim number two, many more people are still going to die. Yes, some, in fact, many more people are going to die. Yes, it is tragic. But it's not much different than dying from other causes. People die of car accidents, yet we haven't shut down driving. People die of lung cancer, yet we haven't prohibited smoking. People die of HIV and other STDs, yet having recreational sex is still legal. People have been living with or dying from the flu for centuries, yet we have never shut down our lives to this extent. We dealt with those issues not by prohibiting, but by building smart incentives, e.g. artificial high taxes on tobacco, and means of protection, e.g. condoms, around the problem, not by shutting everything down. Yes, COVID disproportionately affects elderly and people who are less well. Yes, older folks who might have had a good 10 to 20 active and good quality years ahead of them are dying due to the virus. But that's no news either. Anybody who knows a couple nurses, doctors, paramedics is aware that old people always get, on average, worst case, even pre-COVID. They understand much less effort is made to help them recover or save them. Most paramedics are not fighting as hard for the life of an 80-year-old as they are for the life of an 8-year-old. That's how it is. Biologically, we're hardwired to save people who can still reproduce. And as a society, we value those who are economically productive. Think about it. There has always been a capped price on human life. Otherwise, the insurance and health system would collapse. Every country has a magic number over which sustaining a human life is simply too costly. Every year of life has a price tag on it. And every medicine is only approved and administered if it can add more dollars, measured in the number of quality years it can save, than what it costs. Naturally, the elderly and those stricken with illness have less years to be saved and thus less budget for treatment. So why all of a sudden are we acting like we have to save every single life, no matter the cost? To shut down economies, bailing them out with trillions of dollars borrowed from future generations just to save a couple lives makes no rational sense. Now, claim number 3. By employing restrictive measures across the board, we are creating more bad than good. We have fallen prey to number fixation. Remember how often you were checking worldometer when this first began? Numbers of cases and numbers of deaths are easy to measure. Anybody can Google them and then theorize for the causes of growth or shrinkage in some countries versus others. This is exactly what's been going on in the media for the past 9 months. The numbers will tell you that more restrictions probably means less cases. What these simple numbers won't tell you is the other, darker side of the restrictions. How many patients will die or have their conditions worsen because they won't go to the doctor or their surgery is postponed? How many people will commit suicide due to job loss or isolation? How much less love will there be because couples won't be able to get to know each other? How many new friendships have we forgone? How many businesses will not come to be because co-founders will never meet? What will be the loss of GDP due to lockdowns? How much less productivity due to home office? And subsequently, how many people will die just based on these macro effects, as there are studies that clearly show correlation between GDP growth and quality of healthcare? What will be the long-term effects of not having proper school? What will that do to the employment prospect of fresh graduates? What will be the cost of this to the whole society if this whole cohort of students leaves the system undereducated? How much will happiness and quality of life drop because you don't see any smiles under face masks and nobody hugs you anymore because they fear to get the virus or to have given you the virus or just fear breaking the rules? How many future dictators will thrive on having entire populations used to being subdued, stripped of basic freedoms for months and years on end? And sadly, many, 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 many more invisible or hard to spot effects. Why won't the media tell you that? Because it's not an easy story that could be wrought into 2 paragraphs. In the second episode of our podcast 40, we needed 3 hours just to properly examine how lockdowns decimate the music industry. We covered how many bands and clubs will never re-emerge after COVID, how much talent is lost, and how the ripple effects from shutting down concerts and festivals scatters hundreds of thousands of jobs across the Czech Republic alone. So if we accept the predicament that the vaccine is not a final solution, then we should not look at any anti-COVID restrictive measures as something temporary. The virus is not going away, hence we should weigh any restrictive decisions as if they were long-term. Here, at maximum, we're talking about a couple thousand lives, maybe tens of thousands in the case of the Czech Republic. Most restrictive measures, of course, are adopted in the name of saving lives. But at maximum, we're talking about a couple thousand lives saved, maybe tens of thousands in the case of the Czech Republic. So the right question to ask yourself is this number worth, for instance, 5 years of lockdowns and crippled economy, 5 years of no hugs and no smiles, 5 years of no concerts, festivals, entertainment parks, theaters, no going to see your favorite soccer star or go cheering for your local club in your village, 5 years of staring into screens for an even longer part of the day, 5 years of on and off schooling, 5 years of online courses instead of proper education, 5 years of not meeting new people, being it in work, as friends or as lovers. Is it worth billions of people losing their jobs and decimating whole industries and sectors? You know, once people leave travel, culture, hospitality jobs, it will take years to rehire, retrain and rebuild. Is it worth the dramatic decrease in human contact, resulting in all sorts of effects on our psyche, both as individuals and as a society as a whole? Claim number 4. We have to decide between many evils, and the decisions at the end of the day will not be epidemiological, but political and philosophical in nature. Let me ask you this. Is 1 million people being able to see soccer match worth saving 1 human life, 10, 100, or 0? Unfortunately, there is no scientific equation that will tell you the answer. It's an old problem from the utilitaristic school of political philosophy. Every one of us weighs that decision differently, and by the active participation in public life, and in elections, we as a society somehow aggregate the opinions and find a temporary equilibrium. That's why, at the end of the day, the nature of the very tough decisions we are making is not health or epidemiological in nature, but purely political. At the end of the day, COVID and the policies around it are nothing more than a position on one of the oldest political axes, public safety versus the freedom of an individual, the two of which are in constant tension. The sooner we realize that, admit that to ourselves, and finally stop hiding behind epidemiologists' charts, the sooner we can have that political debate about where we want the new equilibrium to be, and the sooner we can get back to the new normal with a relative peace of mind, as opposed to waging cultural wars about face masks forever. Let's face it, COVID-related decisions are political already anyways. One proof? I have personally visited a couple countries besides the Czech Republic this year, and I saw firsthand how measures are different in every one of them, and that stricter restrictions don't necessarily mean fewer cases. Sometimes just the opposite is true. Sweden, with much more relaxed measures than the Czech Republic, had suffered 8,000 deaths. That's 2,000 less than the Czech Republic did. In the Dominican Republic, where people never stopped going to restaurants and large parties, 4 times less deaths and 6 times less cases were recorded than in my homeland, the Czech Republic. Proof number 2? Very few countries are gonna shut down Christmas holidays, even though the data suggests that the spread is among the highest between relatives being in the same room for a number of hours, which is exactly what's gonna happen over Christmas almost everywhere around the globe. Right now, you cannot go have a beer or play soccer with your friends, while you can go see your whole family, even though the latter is more risky behavior. Why is that? Very few politicians would like to face the public outrage over shutting down this year's festivities. Science weighs very little in these decisions already. Claim number 5. We need to act now while we still have what's left of the goodwill of the people. There are no great outcomes of the ongoing crisis, and we can have anything we want, but not everything we want. The questions we as a society need to be asking ourselves right now are: how much is saving human lives worth? And not just money-wise, but in all of the other invisible costs I outlined previously. Should we prioritize saving COVID patients or cancer patients, for instance? Very soon, citizens around the globe will start arguing that the pandemic is not a society extinct-threatening event, but just another disease of which we have many. I expect that high courts will, in many places, side with them, taking governments' emergency powers away. Governments around the globe are thus buying their last month of time to flatten curves in the run-up to vaccination, which is not going to work as expected. So, they really need to start asking, and soon after answering, the tough questions in short order. If the virus is here to stay, and if we cannot keep the lockdowns and other draconic measures going on for much longer, maybe only for the fact that populations start disobeying them on a massive scale, if we can never go back to pre-COVID times, how will we rebuild and reorganize the health system? How will we triage who will live and who will die? These are the fundamental questions that we need to solve, and not if 4 or 6 people can die at one table. Sadly, it seems the current political representation, whose biggest problem in the past 30 years were if we will be paying less or more taxes, is absolutely not ready to deal with the situation and the way of these decisions. What can you do as an individual? Now, if everything above is true, and if the topics and impacts of different regulatory decisions are so far-reaching and complicated, is there any rational path we as individuals or business owners can take to help alleviate the situation? I very much believe so, and here they are. Number 1, I believe we should keep behaving responsibly and limit the participation or creation of large gatherings of people. That's the reason why I, for instance, in my company, instituted mandatory home office every time the score on the PES safety scale in the Czech Republic goes to 4, even though many other companies around us are still meeting in the offices by the dozens and are throwing Christmas parties like it's 2019, not 2020. I do believe the effects of overwhelmed hospitals and ICUs is a real thing, and I strongly feel it is not responsible to contribute to it as a healthy and young person, so the more elderly would die in vain. It is an expression of intergenerational solidarity. We owe that much to the generations who raised us and built our current world for us. Number 2, this behavior has to have a deadline though. And for me, it is the moment when in each respective country most high-risk groups are vaccinated and the vaccine is generally available to the mass public for an affordable price. In other words, everybody who wants to get vaccinated can do so easily. Number 3, at which point the exact opposite needs to happen. All of us should demand and put pressure on our political representation to immediately lift most of the restrictive measures they will have piled up over the last year. We must attack with vigor. We need to strip down the narrative that saving any single life is worth the high sacrifices on the part of the society as a whole. It has never been like that in the whole history of humankind, and it opens doors to very dangerous lines of thinking that can justify some nasty anti-liberty and anti-democratic policies. Hugs, smiles, dating, sports, leisure, and casual hangouts, all of that has to come back as close to normal as humanly possible. Number 4, if there are any upcoming elections in your country, you should vote out the incompetent set of parties and politicians who are just scrambling around with one set of restrictions after another and who are unable to lead. Replace them with those who emerged as leaders during this current crisis. And lastly, let me give you a short recap. Number 1, vaccine is not a final solution. Number 2, the world is going to spend the next 3 to 6 months focusing on vaccination, only to find out that we are able to vaccinate roughly 50% of the population. Number 3, so rather than wait to arrive at that point with no plan for returning to normal, we should acknowledge right now that A, the virus is here to stay, and B, the decisions between less deaths and a more open way of life are purely political. Number 4, the sooner we do that, the sooner we can begin planning our journey back to normality. The overlooked danger of the vaccine is that it won't be able to live up to the hopes the world has for it. It won't make the virus go away. In 6 months, the whole world is going to realize that. But by that point, there might be no more goodwill among the populace to follow more and more restrictions, which might lead to a sudden spike in transmissions and number of cases. The health system could collapse. Therefore, politicians must start preparing. Preparing both the actual plans and psychologically preparing the public for what's going to come when the hope of the vaccine solving our problem once and for all will abruptly disperse. If you agree with my line of thinking, and if you feel like it is underrepresented in the public debate, please spread the word about this video or podcast to your friends. Be safe.